Hello, everybody. It's Dr. Stringer again. We're back for our next lecture for Module 3, which is on Compstat. So this week, your assigned readings are Police Quarterly by Jang and his colleagues, as well as another article from Morin Braga, which is also a policing article. And so we're going to be talking about Compstat today, and then next week we're going to talk about mapping and all of that sort of stuff. And you'll start to see probably next week. Maybe I'll try to make some comparisons as we're going along about how Compstat and crime mapping are interrelated. As we're getting started, I assume you guys are probably going to watch this before you read the articles. One thing I would tell you is that some of the methodology might be a little bit complicated, and so don't worry so much about that. I think that if you get the key points of the articles, what they're trying to convey, I think you'll be okay. And, I think it's good for you to be exposed to these methodologically advanced things, but don't get too hung up on them if you don't quite understand the whole time series modeling and all of that kind of stuff. I know I'm sure it goes into great detail about that, so don't get hung up in all of those details if you don't understand it. So to begin, what is Compstat? Well, if you read the articles, you'll probably find out, but basically it's an acronym that puts together this idea of computers and statistics, and so it becomes Compstat. Some people actually call it Comstat. You see that less frequently, but I like the term Compstat with a P, but you can use it interchangeably and it still says the same thing. So I have this little definition up here from Walsh, which is a goal-oriented strategic management process that uses computer technology, operational strategy, and managerial accountability to structure the manner in which a police department provides crime control services. So if we look at Compstat and what it's trying to achieve, so Compstat has a lot to do with order maintenance. And so it is an aggressive order maintenance policing style that seeks to restore order to the streets. This was a big thing in New York City, and so we'll talk about that as we go through. But it focuses a lot on what order maintenance is. And so order maintenance is a lot of this aggressive policing strategy aimed at vagrancy, prostitution, public drunkenness, these other crimes like that you wouldn't really consider to be really serious crimes. And many people might say that they're victimless crimes. Other people might say that they do have a victim to them, and the victim is society, yada, yada, yada. We're not going to get into all of those details for the purposes of technology, but it is important to know that that is something to think about. One of the key parts of Compstat is that it holds police commanders accountable for the crime rates in their districts. And one of the main ways that it does this is it's able to tell us what the crime rates are in each district. And so what will happen is there'll be analysts who will come up with the crime rates, and then they will put all this together. And what will happen is there'll be meetings in these areas that people will call war rooms, where the commanders get grilled on their knowledge of the crime patterns as well as the crime prevention techniques, and people will want to know, what are you doing to correct all of this? So that's a great way of holding people accountable and getting them to actually make changes and do different things in order to achieve this common goal, which is reducing crime and preventing crime and catching those offenders when they do commit crime. So there's four main goals of Compstat. So they say that the intelligence should be timely and accurate. That information should be gathered on how and where crimes are committed and who's committing them at all different levels, so that way we can coordinate our enforcement efforts into these areas. And when we get into the crime mapping, this will become a little bit more transparent, and you'll be able to see how we actually map where these crimes are occurring, and this is how we get this intelligence. And it says that there should be rapid police and other first responder deployment. So by this definition, we're also talking about fire and ambulances and things like that, and moving those resources closer to where we need them so that they can get there faster. And it requires everybody to work as a team. A lot of this has also gotten a little bit more influential with the incident command structures and the things like that that have taken place after the 9/11 disaster at the federal level. And so now there's a lot more stress on getting everybody to work as a team and figuring out the command structure and things like that when there are incidents of mass destruction and things like that that occur. Because for those of you that don't know, one of the big problems with the 9/11 disaster was that there was just so many different organizations there. It was difficult to have a clear command structure. So there should also be effective policing tactics. So this is interesting because we want to determine what is effective, what's not effective, and so that way we can go and tweak things so that way we're using the effective stuff and not so much focusing on things that are ineffective or ineffective, if you will. And then there should be follow-up and assessment so that way we're constantly figuring out what works and what doesn't work and then thinking about these things as we move forward rather than just doing something and thinking that it's working and that it might not be. So these are all things that are important to think about. The theoretical background from Compstat comes from broken windows theory. I'm not going to get into too much of the details about that, but just to show you guys the path there. So crime and disorder makes people less likely to, disorder leads people less likely to be in an area, pro-social people and things like that. So you end up with more deviance there and more other problems, which leads to greater fear of crime. As fear of crime increases, then you have even less people that are pro-social people, and you end up with more deviance and more antisocial behavior. As you have more of this and goes on, you have a loss of social control, of informal social control at least. And then this all together leads to crime. And I didn't have the last arrow that crime leads back to disorder, but it actually is a cyclical effect. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what that talks about, even though, obviously this is a technology class, it's not a theory class, so that's not going to be a great deal of your coursework moving forward in this class. So one of the big takeaways to have from this module is that technology can play a useful role in improving police performance and crime prevention. But technology can't do it alone. The measurement is very important. How we measure crime and how we measure the reductions in crime, as well as enforcement and things like that. There's reasons why you guys are taking research methods and things of that nature as you become moving forward in your coursework, because these things are very critical. And as Compstat is becoming more and more popular, as well as mapping and things like that, chances are those of you that go into law enforcement someday might end up needing to have this information and needing to have these skills. And so that becomes increasingly important for you. So, looking at the first article, the Moore and Braga article, which is right here, for those of you who haven't already looked at it or downloaded it or printed it or anything like that, this article talks about these different ideas of Compstat, and it talks about an external accountability, and it says that it's only by embracing external accountability that a police chief can actually have any chance of driving organizations to high levels of performance or to shifting the overall strategy of the organization, which is important because we want the chief to have some accountability so that way he is motivated to change things to help with the crime prevention and help increase policing and things like that, and to change and adapt different strategies. And this process should be transparent. The chief has a duty to the citizens, taxpayers, and other civilians for transparency so that we know what's going on. And there's also internal accountability. So are the methods being employed actually reducing crime? Or are they not reducing crime? These are important things to know for looking at these different behaviors. So some other features of Compstat that this article talks about is it holds managers and units responsible for their performance. Measures are simple, objective, reliable, and continuous. And accountability is constant. You're constantly accountable. Depending on the jurisdiction, you might be meeting weekly. Other jurisdictions might meet monthly. This is really popular in larger metropolitan areas. They're very critical about what's going on with the Compstat. And in a lot of areas, this Compstat data will be public. You can actually download it or look at it on the police department's website. So again, back to this idea of holding managers accountable, managers being the higher-ups, the brass, if you will, in the department. One of the things that is important is you should hold them accountable for the outcome of policing. That means the outcomes, the crime reduction, not the output, not the process. We don't really want to worry so much about holding you accountable for how you achieve crime reductions, but we want to hold you accountable for reducing crime. So that gets into this kind of idea of not micromanaging people, not micromanaging these managers, but telling them, hey, you have to do something about this. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but you need to do it. Of course, we can always give people advice and help them with that, but they're not accountable for the means of doing so. In areas where crime is getting worse, commanders will be often questioned repeatedly about how they're going to deal with this, what they're going to do about it. And a lot of these meetings will be public, so they get questioned. And they're subject to ridicule by citizens and other people, possibly even victims of crime. So this becomes important. And so looking at, is Compstat effective? So Compstat is widely used and is especially popular, like I said, in large areas, large cities and things like that. Many politicians and researchers think that it's wonderful. It's contributing to crime reductions. But a lot of these claims are made without evidence. And there's not a lot of research on the matter. We're going to talk about a couple of articles. One of the articles is this other Chang article that I had you all read, as well as another article by Richard Rosenfeld and colleagues, which is this quasi-experimental design from New York City. Your other reading, I believe, is Texas? Fort Worth, that's right. And so we're going to compare those two articles moving forward to see if Compstat is effective, because this is an important thing to think about. So looking at this Rosenfeld article that I didn't assign you guys, I'm just going to talk about briefly. It shows that there was a very significant and sustained drop in New York City. So that's why New York City is an important place to study. And so New York City dropped along for several decades along with the rest of the country, only it was a much more significant drop. And it's been much more sustained than other cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, places like that. But the evidence does show that the crime drop can't be attributed to Compstat. That article says that there could be other explanations for it, but whatever it is that caused this, it was not Compstat. The problem with that is in New York City, like I said, the brass continues to attribute this crime drop to broken windows policing and Compstat. Now, one of the interesting things to think about is that it could very well be due to broken windows policing, but this article just talks about it is not due to Compstat. So there might be some truth to that statement if that's what the brass is saying, that it's due to broken windows policing, but since this is looking at Compstat, that article clearly defined the idea that it's not due to Compstat. So looking about, not about, or what about other places? So this other article that I had you guys read, the Jang and colleagues from 2010 article, looks at Compstat in Fort Worth. And so this is a quantitative and a qualitative study. So some people would call that a mixed method study. And so what does that mean? So for those of you that haven't taken research methods, a quantitative study, excuse me, is an empirically based study. It uses numbers. It uses fancy quantitative analysis, like you saw the time series analysis that was done in there. You'll also see interviews and things like that. Interviews, people telling stories. Sometimes people will read newspaper articles and combine themes out of articles in the news and things like that. So one key distinction there is that the quantitative uses numbers. The qualitative is interviews and is much different type of data. And you can see that type of thing in there. So this study had four main research questions, and the first one is, are there any significant increases in the arrest rate for broken windows type offenses following the implementation of Compstat? And remember, these broken windows offenses are things like vagrancy, prostitution, maybe drunk in public, different kind of things like that. And then the last three questions were, are there significant changes in Part 1 violent offenses? So these are your rapes, robberies, murders, aggravated assault, things like that. And then are there significant changes in Part 1 property offenses? That's your burglaries, your larcenies, your automobile theft, things like that. So these are all the most serious offenses, if you will, all of your Part 1 offenses. And then the last one is just combined of the first two Part 1. So that's the last one is all Part 1 offenses. So it's Part 1 violent and property offenses. So the results from this study show that it did significantly increase broken windows enforcement. So that did lead to a significant increase in these not robbery, but the vagrancy and prostitution and drunkenness and things like that. However, for the overall, but for the changes in the individual crimes, it was about the same. So there was average monthly increased for drunkenness, drugs, and disorderly, but they also decreased for vagrancy, vandalism, and prostitution. So when you put that all together, it's really about the same. Some went down, some went up, but it wasn't that much of a difference. But for research questions 2, 3, and 4, there was a slight downward trend for property and total crime. However, there was no change in violent crime. So what do we get from that? Well, Compstat significantly changed the property and the overall crime rates, but it didn't significantly change the violent crime rate. I think that's a key thing to take away from that, is that, yes, it had some impact on the property crimes and the overall crime rate. But these most serious offenses, the violent crimes, the rapes, the robberies, the murders, it doesn't have any effect on. So that's an important thing to take away from all of this. So what can we conclude about Compstat based upon this? Well, we can say that given the conflicting information from both the Jang and the Rosenfeld articles, that the true impact of Compstat remains unknown. We really don't know to this point. There's not a lot of other articles out there to look at. There's just not a lot of research. However, as I said, the results from the Jang article do suggest that Fort Worth's use of the Compstat program did help to significantly reduce the property crimes and the total index crimes. And you might think, well, how can it explain the total Part 1 offenses but not the violent total offenses or the violent Part 1 offenses? Well, the vast majority of those Part 1 offenses, when you lump them all together, are going to be your property crime rates. So you're going to end up with a whole lot more property crimes than you are murders. And that's just simply the way it is throughout the country for the most part. There's a lot more people out there stealing things than there are people murdering people. And so that probably doesn't come to a big surprise to all of you. So lastly, what are the policy implications? So what does this mean? Should we stop using Compstat? Should we continue to use it? What should we do? Well, one thing that's important to remember is Compstat is not a rigorously defined program. So the way that it's used in New York City might be different than the way that it's used in Tulsa. Tulsa. I'm talking about Tulsa because I'm going to have you guys watch a video about Tulsa, but I'll get to that in a minute. I'm sorry, Fort Worth. So the Fort Worth version of Compstat might be different than the New York City version. And so maybe that's why we get different results for these things. And so it's not standardized. It's not the same everywhere else. That's a key thing to remember. And so it's still unclear what role Compstat played in reducing the crime in New York City. As we said, they said that it's not due to Compstat. But we have to think about this idea that it may not be the soft technology of Compstat that impacted the policing strategy in New York City, let me rephrase that. It was not the soft technology of Compstat that impacted crime, but instead it was the policing strategy. Now remember, policing strategy that goes along with Compstat is often the broken windows type of policing. So as I said, it could be related to the broken windows policing without actually being part of Compstat. So what we could have had there is an impact of the broken windows policing, even though we were able to rule out Compstat, because we know from the Jang article that Compstat is related to increased arrests for these broken windows type offenses. And so we do know that the two are correlated. So interestingly, research should probably try to tease that out if there's going to be any more research on this, but we don't know currently. And so just lastly, and this is probably something we'll come back to over and over again throughout the semester, but it's not it's not the technology that you have, but it's how you use it, or don't use it for that matter. You can have a computer sitting in your laptop bag, but how you use it is completely different, right? I'm sure that people are much differently able to use their computers across even the people that are listening to this video right now. And many people use them differently and use them more or less frequently. So the usage of these things is very important. So with that, that's all I'm going to say about Compstat for this particular module. But I want you guys to continue to think about this. I'm also going to post a video, as I mentioned, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which talks about Compstat, which I would like you all to read, watch, and make sure that you do so before you take your quiz, because there's going to be some questions in your quiz about that video. So make sure that you do so. Also, I made a couple of notes that some of you, when you reply to your discussion board questions, are writing your own post, but you're not replying to someone else's post. So please make sure you do that in the future. That was something that happened the first week. I've already graded all of those. And hopefully, as I'm recording this video, you guys are doing the stuff from the second week. So with that, I wish you all a happy end of the week and a happy beginning of the week, as you're probably watching this video. And I hope that you will email me if you have any questions or comments. And with that, I will say goodbye and I will talk to you soon.